read about it online. It seemed like this magical unicorn, that's like this awesome adventure you could go on to. And that's why we did it.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Dylan Collier. I'm a physical therapist and welcome to the New Medical Nomads podcast, where I get to document my journey as a medical traveler, as well as interview other experts within the traveling field. Now, the rules for the traveling game are constantly changing, so anything you hear on this show should be for entertainment purposes only. This is not legal, financial, or medical advice. Enjoy the show and safe travels. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am here today with Andrew Craig, who is a nurse, a traveling nurse. And Craig, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Where are you at right now?
I'm in Minnesota. Are you as in location in the house or in the state?
As specific as you want to be.
Oh, I got you. So, I'm visiting family right now. That's where you call me. But we're traveling in Madison, Wisconsin right now at the University Hospital.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'm pretty excited. So you are not only the first non-physical therapist on the show, but you're also the first dude. So I'm ready and I'm excited to just bro out a little bit.
Awesome.
Get a little bit nerdy.
Cool.
We're kind of connected that way as well. But
For sure.
So do you want to go ahead and just give us a little background on yourself, kind of at the beginning of your travel career, what launched you off, maybe along the path, some information, and then where you're at in the process right now?
Oh, sure. Where do I begin? It's been an awesome journey so far. My wife and I are both travelers. We started traveling almost 2 years ago now. And it's a fun story because we went on our honeymoon to Scotland, I was telling you about. And Scotland's beautiful. It's probably one of the most beautiful countries I've ever been to. And we stayed there for a couple of weeks. And when we got back to North Liberty, Iowa, which, you said you're from Missouri, and I can totally relate to that because basically all we have is cornfields. And we wanted change. And I knew a traveler on my unit. Started to ask him some questions. And, 2 months later, we started travel nursing.
Wow. That's awesome.
It was really fast.
Yeah.
Because we loved our jobs, we loved the people we were working with, but we knew that there was an itch that we had to scratch. We had heard of travelers, from other nurses that had done it or read about it online. It seemed like this magical unicorn, that's like this awesome adventure you could go on to. And that's why we did it. And we've been doing it ever since.
Very cool.
We started in North Liberty, Iowa. We worked at the University of Iowa at the large hospital there. And then we went from Iowa to Minneapolis, Minnesota, Minneapolis to Klamath Falls, Oregon. And from Oregon, we went to where we're currently at, which is Madison, Wisconsin. And we worked at mainly university hospitals, but we've also done a smaller hospital, like a Trauma 4 center, which is about 200 beds in Klamath Falls, Oregon, which was pretty sweet because the patient population was a lot less sick because they would often get sent to major universities. So going from a Trauma 4 center to a major university was like, It was a huge adjustment. It's going from stable, independent patients for the most part to now we're on a trauma step-down unit and everybody's broken. Basically, we've got all kinds of physical therapy business. Let me tell you, broken backs, broken legs, broken ribs. I'm sure basically everybody has a physical therapy ordered. So, yeah, that's the main gist of our traveling journey so far.
Very cool. Very cool. So that's interesting that you guys kind of wanted some change and you jumped right in, and that's awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about the dynamic of traveling with your wife? Do you guys typically go to the same unit or the same hospital, or do you sometimes get split up?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We've turned down jobs that wouldn't let us work together.
Okay.
Travel nursing is stressful, and you read about it, the loneliness that people experience on the forums and the Facebook groups. We're really lucky to have each other, and we actually applied at a hospital in Des Moines, Iowa. We were good, except they wouldn't let us work on the same unit. They had two separate units that needed nurses, and they just wouldn't let us do it.
Okay.
So we respectfully declined, and I think they were a little surprised about that. But we liked working with each other. It was a gamble when we first started because we had no idea if it was going to work, because we spend like 24/7 together, essentially. Work, home, and we have our own separate hobbies we do. But honestly, I could say that I love it, and when we settle someday, I would love to work on the same unit with her, even as a staff nurse, because
cool.
We like it. We really like it.
Very, very cool. I'll kind of go into some. So I'm not very educated on travel nursing, the travel nursing side of things. So I'm very curious on how that kind of setup is. As a traveling physical therapist, there's different settings that you can go to: outpatient, neuro, acute care hospital like yourself. You were discussing a little bit of the differences between going to one unit versus the other. How much does that play into during the application process, where you say, oh, I've worked on this unit? Do you typically only apply for that type of unit after that point? Or is there a difference between the units, or is it all just kind of conglomerated in one group?
Okay.
That's a long-winded question. I apologize.
That's a big one. So, most nurses have a specialty they work in, whether that's a med-surg unit or progressive care unit, ICU, ER, labor and delivery. And that comes into play when you start to negotiate and look for jobs. So, for instance, Sarah and I work primarily progressive care, which is the middle ground between it's the middle ground between ICU and your standard med-surg general floor.
Okay.
They're usually sick, really sick, and oftentimes they're really on their way to the ICU more than general care. So we work primarily in that specialty. The thing about that is, though, we can't float up, meaning we can't get floated to the ICU and take ICU patients, but we could float down. So anywhere, we can go to any general care floor, probably except labor and delivery or postpartum, and there's probably a couple of them out there. But for instance, at this hospital, while I work trauma step down or trauma progressive care, I've been floated to 6 or 8 different general care floors this contract alone in the last 5 months. So does that answer your question about?
Yes, it does.
Okay, cool. I was sorry, I was a little confused there, but that's cool.
You're all good.
Yeah.
Good. One of the things that I've heard just from talking with my nursing friends is that they cannot come straight out of school like a physical therapist can in order to do travel. But I don't know if that's just one of the rumors kind of going around or if that's fact. Could you spread some light on that?
That's absolutely fact, without a doubt. Most travel nurse companies will not hire you unless you have a minimum of 1 year.
Okay.
Personally, I would recommend a person to have at least a year and a half to 2 years. And I'll tell you why. As a brand new nurse, you're learning to manage 3 to 5 patients' problems. And it takes a good year to really learn how to manage not only the patient's issues, but collaborate with your team members, work with your coworkers. With just a year, you're barely competent to manage a full patient load. Now, I'm sure it's individualized for each different nurse, of course. but to safely travel, you should probably have at least a year. There is one exception to that. I've met a single traveler that had 6 months of ICU experience on his own, and he had like 6 months of internship essentially. And for some reason, his company used that 6 months of his internship or training orientation as part of his year of experience, which he did fine. But overall, you should have at least a year. The last thing I would say about whether a nurse should have a year of experience or not is because, as you know, orientation is super short, 2 to 3 days on average, and you need to be on top of your skill set and independence to be functional in such a short period of time. And I can relate to this because when I started traveling, I had just a little over a year of progressive care experience or acute care experience because I was in nursing homes before that.
I see.
And so on our first day, I hate to say it, but I actually had a little panic attack because it was so overwhelming. I was in the med room, all of this stress was getting to me because I realized that I'm way out of my comfort level and comfort zone. I didn't know the patient population, and I was still pretty new, just a year in. I think it's a good idea to have at least a year, if not 2.
Got it.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, one of the things that I heard a lot was kind of the same thing coming out of school, is that, you should probably get a year of experience before you really jump in. But most of the traveling physical therapists that I've talked to disagree with that. So we get a little more extra schooling. We almost have a full year of really clinicals before we kind of launch off. And most of the travel PTs are supportive of saying, just go for it, just get into it.
Yeah.
And one of the arguments I've actually heard is that sometimes when you come out of school, you go through that contract negotiation. It's the first time, you don't have experience with it, so you make a couple hiccups and a couple mistakes that you might be regretting later. Yeah. But also, if you don't know those questions to ask as you're going into a job, now you've kind of spent a whole year at this position that maybe wasn't the best fit for you professionally, or just building up skills.
Yes.
So not only did you get a year of experience, it might have been bad experience, might have kind of made you feel like you wasted a year almost. But luckily, at least from my experience, I've had great mentorship and thus so far from my friend. But I definitely kind of see some people going out of school getting into what I call these exercise mills, where it's just this outpatient. They're seeing up to 30 visits a day, like crazy amounts of patient load, and just kind of getting burnt out really fast.
Yes.
But I know, at least for travel PTs, typical travel careers around 2 to 3 years.
Yes.
You know that for nurses?
What I've noticed is people either travel just for 1 assignment or maybe 2 assignments, or they're kind of like us where they get at least a few years in. There's not a lot of middle ground. So it seems like travelers, or you have the people that end up traveling for 10 or 15 years. It's crazy. I've even I've not met her personally. A coworker of mine now has a sister that's been traveling for like 25 years.
Wow.
It's crazy. So that'd be a long, interesting career, I'm sure. Yeah. Yep.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So how long have you been traveling now?
We started in January of 2016. So a year and a half now.
Okay. Cool. Very cool. And I'm sure there's been multiple learning experiences along the way. What is something that you know now that you wish you would have known starting out?
There's a lot. I have a list here, in fact.
Oh, great.
The first thing that I wish I would have known is how much agencies paint a really romantic picture of traveling. They're really good at marketing the adventure, the money, the awesome lifestyle of traveling, which is true. It's very true. It is adventurous, and the money is usually better than being in one place. What they don't tell you is how challenging it can be sometimes, or how you can receive unfair patient assignments from your coworkers, or maybe even treated poorly, which we've experienced, unfortunately. Like travelers will get targeted, or even blamed. We've never had that severe of relationship with our assignment, but it does exist if you read the forums. But also, traveling can be really hard on you as a traveler, because you're away from your family and friends. It can be feeling kind of lonely sometimes. So I would say that it's important to have a realistic view of what traveling is, which is it's an awesome adventure, but it does have significant challenges that you have to consider. Also, let's see, I have that. So that's the first part. I think the other part that I wish I would have known a year and a half ago is kind of what I'm learning now. Traveling isn't just about the money. While you do make good money, I think it's important to seek out experiences, developing relationships with people that you work with, going to see neat places. You don't necessarily have to go to California or San Francisco or these really popular locations. You can go to unusual locations, have some flexibility to try things that you may not have thought you'd be open to. And that's what Sarah and I have done. We've done no destinations. We've done all kind of unusual places. Like, people are like, why would you travel to Minneapolis, Minnesota in the middle of the winter, which is what we did our first time. And let me tell you, I'm from Iowa, or I'm from Illinois, but the winters in Minnesota are a whole other level of stuff. So, yeah, it's a journey. You learn every single day, every single assignment, and yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
I'm trying to think here. That's the big stuff. Yeah.
All right. I've definitely experienced kind of what you were talking about with dealing with companies who kind of romanticize traveling. And not that there's, like you said, it's all very true. And there's a lot of adventure, a lot of learning that goes along into it. It's very exciting. But also when they kind of downplay maybe some of the issues that you run into, or don't disclose that maybe they're getting an incentive on how much that you're actually earning from the company, and so are incentivized in other ways to try and get your bottom dollar lower,
yes,
in order to pay you less salary so that they're getting a little more payment themselves. So that was definitely something that I've learned just even before I get kicked off here, just through my ability to make contacts with other recruiting companies and things like that.
Oh, really? Like, you've in what way, as far as like the pay, how did you learn some of that?
So I was talking with an individual who's been on the show, and she was discussing how I was always told maybe to expect 10 to 15% more through payment on your contracts as a travel PT. And she was almost taken back by that. She's like, no, it is much higher than that. She wasn't comfortable to give me a range, didn't really know what the range was, but then offered this information that, actually, depending on how much they pay you, they get like a percentage of the entire package. And they might be incentivized to try and get you lower than it would be to, try and get the most that you can out of the assignment.
Yes.
Not all companies are like that from what I hear, but there are some companies out there, and when the incentive lies there, I think there's going to be some individuals who are keeping that in their mind and trying to take advantage of that.
For sure. Absolutely.
But the experience that I had, I told you that I was actually in the middle of almost reaching out, getting contracts for positions when I got this offer from my friend when he started his business. And when I told them that, hey, I'm actually not going to do traveling anymore, I'm going to, work for my friend for a year and I'll contact you guys then. They were very aggressive with trying to convince me that, oh, I think you're making the wrong decision. I think you need to really travel. I think you need to come do this, blah, blah, blah. And some were really cool, but there's one individual that I was thinking of that it wasn't just one phone call. She kept calling me and saying, like, are you sure? Like, and telling me some of the, maybe trying to convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's kind of something that fueled this podcast in order to get more information out there, because I continually learn things as I'm going along. And I'm sure once I actually start, there's going to be a flood of knowledge coming in that I'm going to have to try and deliver to all the listeners.
Oh, yeah.
But just kind of realizing that maybe, I don't want to call it a shady business. Let me see if I can think of a better term. There's a lot of non-transparency in the field. And the more and more I talk to other seasoned medical travelers, the more that I get to learn and figure it out, and hopefully distribute that to other people that might help them along their path.
Man, you said it. That is so, oh man. So I told you about my course that I'm creating for travelers, and one of the things that I'm trying to create, or one aspect of that is, breaking down contracts and breaking down the pay and trying to help people understand that. And you're so right, because companies, it's crazy. Companies are not transparent about what they charge the hospitals for our work. I don't know if have you heard of the term bill rate? Do you know what that means?
Is that the money that hospitals give per hour to the companies?
Exactly. It's whichever way you want to look at it. It's what the agency charges the hospital, or the hospital pays the agency. Okay. Let's say, for the sake of things, let's say it's $100 an hour for this particular contract. Who knows? It's usually not that high, but it's in the $60 to $70 range that the hospital pays the agency. For my research, I've learned that the agency, from their business expenses plus the profit margins that they make, I think their business expenses are about 20% or so. And then oftentimes profit margins are anywhere from 18 to 25%. So let's say the bill rate's $100 an hour. It might trickle down to you at $45 an hour. So that's what they have to pay you for everything, not just your salary, but your 401k, your medical, the travel reimbursements. And so there is an incentive on the recruiter's end to pay you, less, because they work off of commission. So when they offer you a bottom dollar rate of $25 an hour, let's just say that just as your salary, not including your benefits, you could potentially negotiate up to, $27, $28 an hour. And most people don't feel comfortable with negotiation because you don't want to offend someone. But the thing is, it's important to advocate for yourself because you're worth it. I mean, especially as a physical therapist. I mean, you have devoted, 8 years of your life to develop your craft?
I got to do a freshman entry course. So straight out of high school, it was 6.5 total.
That's still a ton of time. And yeah, the industry is so not transparent when it comes to bill rates. And so the argument on their end is that it's going to confuse us. It's going to make the pay process and negotiation and breakdown even more challenging to convey to us. But let me tell you, if you can manage a patient's care as a physical therapist or as a travel nurse, there's no doubt in my mind that you can understand bill rates, that you can understand pay package breakdown. I mean, it's just numbers, and it's not that complicated. What happens is what you just described, you get this murky shadiness to this industry, as in because you're not telling us the bill rate, because you're not being transparent, I am less inclined to trust you and less inclined to work with you. I mean, what would you say?
Absolutely, absolutely. I feel like in physical therapy, we actually, and probably nursing as well, bump into this often because I would argue a lot of new grad PTs don't know what's going on with insurances and how companies are getting reimbursed.
Mm-hmm.
Because each insurance is different and each insurance pays for a different per hour of or per unit of whatever you're charging as a PT. It's very hard to understand that because of the kind of, I always think of it like somebody peeking out from behind a curtain. You hear all this like machine work in the back and they're like, oh yeah, this is what we got. Nothing going on back here. Don't worry about it. We got you, type of thing. But so I feel it on both ends, not only just in general, PT treatment and charging for units, billing for your time, but also notice that through the conversations I've had with other travel PTs about medical recruiting companies.
I feel like it would benefit the industry if companies would just tell us exactly what is going on with the bill rates. And I think we would all benefit. It would benefit the companies because I'd trust them more, and it would benefit us as travelers because we wouldn't have this sense of, I'm getting screwed over by a used car salesman technique. You know?
Yeah.
I feel like I get a little excited about this topic.
No, please go.
Really, really pisses me off because anyway, I beat this to, what do they say? You can beat this conversation like a dead horse or something. I don't know. You can also edit that shit out too. That doesn't make any sense. But I don't know the saying, so it doesn't even sound right. Yeah. Anyway.
So kind of going into this field and realizing that, how have you and your wife combated that? So how do you figure out, I've been told it's more important to find those recruiters you can trust. What is your process to find a recruiter that you feel comfortable with, that you do feel like they're being transparent with you? Can you walk us through that?
Whew. Boy, that's a tough one. How do you find a legit recruiter among a sea of sharks? You know, when I first started traveling, I did not trust recruiters at all, no matter if they seemed trustworthy, if they seemed like a decent person, because I know they have a motive, which is they want to make money. They have commissions and a substantial amount of commission. I think the first part is to avoid distrusting recruiters as a whole. You have to be somewhat open to hearing what they have to say, open to developing a relationship to them. And I'm, also just now learning that about myself, that I need to be more open to them. I was in sales before I got into nursing, and I learned that salespeople are, shady. So how do you find a good recruiter? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is, this is a super plug for Laura, but Laura out of Nomadicare is doing something really unique in the industry, which she's vetting recruiters based upon their integrity, their knowledge base, their experience, and helping travelers find good recruiters. But say, for instance, a person had no idea who Laura from Nomadicare is. Like, they're walking off the street, going to Google. I think the first part is to work with multiple companies, develop relationships with multiple recruiters, because you're going to have to rely upon your intuition at the very beginning. The very first conversation I have with recruiters is so crucial to me that if I get a sense that they're trying to oversell me on their benefits, or that they want to make me rich, or blah, 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 do this adventure. If they get two salesmen with me, instantly, it's an instant turnoff. I want someone that is obviously trying to care about my life, care about my needs, listens to my story, takes time for me. I know they have, I know that they have, quotas and benchmarks to get as recruiters, as far as like having to talk to a number of people a day. Some companies aren't like that. And I don't want a company, or rather, I don't want a recruiter to treat me like a number, because the recruiter-traveler relationship is almost a sacred relationship that needs to be very open and kind of compassionate and loving. It's almost like a really good friend that you have to develop. So another way is, you use your intuition, you figure out, this person sounds like a good person, or feels like a good person. I think the next aspect would be to simply Google their name. You can find me on Google. You can find out everything that I've ever written on Google. Andrew Craig RN, you'll find me. The same thing with recruiters is, say I was a recruiter, you could find out if I was legit or not. There's plenty of websites that review recruiters. They have reputations. The downside, I would say, to that is some of these review websites are actually owned by travel nursing agencies. So it makes you wonder, are these reviews legit? It's like they're kind of cooking the books, potentially. I mean, I don't know. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, personally, I haven't had that experience of going through, but I think when I was going through that process of trying to figure out which companies I felt best with and which recruiters I felt comfortable with, I just went through my friends and who they've gone before and who they connected well with. So that I think it's better to use friends because they're not going to just refer you to somebody just to get I know there's a lot of referral bonuses and things like that.
Yep.
But a lot of people, somebody you trust, somebody that might have the same personality as you and be like, I'm more of a laid back type personality. So maybe the person I would choose isn't necessarily the really anxious person who has all the questions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just, going through your friends who you jive well with and then just starting a conversation from there and then always being open about, I know you were saying you take the benefits that are offered by the company. I've also heard people using 2 to 3 different companies and kind of not taking those benefits in order to have that freedom of being able to be more open to different contracts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you typically stick with one company, or how does that work with the 401k benefits and your kind of stipends that come along with it?
So I've only worked with 2 companies. I highly recommend you work with more companies than that, 4 to 6 or more.
Okay.
There's no special number. The bottom line is I recommend multiple companies because I recommend you working with multiple companies, even though it's going to be a pain to fill out their applications. You're going to get calls bombarded every 3 months. It's going to benefit you for a number of reasons. One, for negotiation reasons. You can compare multiple pay packages for the same area to see which is going to benefit you the most. There's going to be some variation in that depending on how many how much benefits you get from a company, whether that's 401k, medical, travel reimbursements, stipends. It depends on what the company is going to give you, and it's going to vary a fair amount. But what was the original question? Sorry.
When you are working with those multiple companies, how does the 401k benefits work out? Because I know typically some of them have you have to be working with us for X long in order to get these benefits.
Oh, I see.
Do you just neglect those and say, no, I'm good, and find other ways to get that type of investment?
Yeah.
Or do you just kind of switch back and forth between the 2 companies?
I got you. So the first company that I worked for had a 401k. I think it was like a 4% match or something. I don't see why a person wouldn't take that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, even though, like, say you're going to have multiple 401k plans through, say, a few different agencies. It's free money. So I don't know why a person wouldn't take it, other than it might be a little inconvenient to have your 401ks, dispersed among multiple plans. The second company that I have doesn't have any 401k benefits at all. They don't have medical benefits. I started to do independent contracting, so my wife and I started a small travel company essentially on our own. So we work for ourselves. So we hire a company to find us work for us. They take a smaller cut off the top, and then we handle all the financial stuff. So ideally at the end of the year. We're not sure, but we're pretty sure that we'll bring home more because of that type of traveling that we do. It's not common. So yeah, I mean, I'd say just take the 401k if it's offered to you, because especially if they match. I mean, some companies, they'll do like 6 or 7%. That's a fair amount, up to a limit.
Uh-huh.
But, yeah.
Okay. And I know, just so I used to work for a PT clinic as a tech, as an aide. Basically just doing, laundry, talking with the patients a little bit, kind of being an extra eyes out there, answering the phone if needed, more clerical work.
Mm-hmm.
But they offered a 401k, and so I thought it would be a good idea to just go ahead and invest. But with their 401k, if you pulled out earlier than the X amount of years that you worked, which is what mine was because I graduated and started working somewhere else, so I pulled out. I was actually taxed more because of the penalties of pulling out.
Oh.
Than it would have been just to take that money originally in my paycheck. So that's kind of where that.
Oh, interesting.
But, and I mean, this podcast isn't we're not accountants or advice by any means, but
right.
Just know that through our experiences, there are different rules that kind of play into each incentive that you get with different companies. So definitely look into those. Don't know how to read the fine print, and hopefully find a buddy or somebody that can kind of show you how to.
Because truthfully, I know almost nothing about 401ks, which is probably not good. I mean, I'm 29. It's good to start investing. I've a 401k through our original company, and then I've got a 401k through the University of Iowa. I think what I suspect will happen is once we eventually settle somewhere, I'll be a little more vigilant about learning about 401ks and how much I can invest and that type of stuff. So, yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, so because of the amount of time that Andrew got to spend with me and the amount of detail that he went into with all the questions, I actually had to split up the interview into 2 parts. So this is the end of part 1. Pay attention for the upcoming part 2. If you have a question or would like to reach out to Andrew, please join our group on Facebook, New Medical Nomads, or look in the show notes and see a way to contact him there. I will provide all the links and stuff that he will ultimately give us in the second part of the interview. Also, check us out on YouTube. If you are listening to this podcast, if you are listening to this interview from the future, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is the way that you're going to get the early access to all the interviews before I officially launch them. So follow us there. You can also find us on the Facebook pages as New Medical Nomads Podcast. That's also going to let you know when there's an update on the episodes. So find us there and stay tuned for the next episode of the New Medical Nomads Podcast.